Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, we've got a bunch of different humble bundles and bundles of holding to look at. We've got a new Fateforge crowdfunding campaign to look at. We're going to talk a little bit about the information coming out about the new D&D starter set coming out in September. There's a fun video about scheduling RPGs. We're going to take a look at what some of the conclusions from that video were and my tips for how to build a sustaining RPG group of friends to get around your table. Bob Worldbuilder had a really interesting video talking about crowdfunding campaigns and trends in tabletop role-playing games. I'm going to talk about some RPGs that I'm looking forward to playing this year. Today's tip is going to be talking about the retreat action, something which I actually used in my game this past week. And we are going to cover more questions from the Sly Flourish Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. The Lazy RPG Talk Show is brought to you by the patrons of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to all kinds of cool stuff, including, what do they get? They get lots of things. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, tools, scenarios, extra podcasts, all kinds of stuff that you get for being a patron of Sly Flourish. You get access to the awesome Lazy RPG community over on Discord. And most of all, patrons help me put on shows like this. To the patrons of Sly Flourish, thank you so much. As I have often mentioned, the best value in tabletop role-playing games comes from humble bundles and bundles of holding. You get tremendous value, and there are 3 different bundles going on right now that are worth your consideration. It's up to you whether you decide that these are worth your actual money, but I thought they were interesting. The first is a Mork Borg bundle of holding. If you're not familiar with Mork Borg is a hard, dark metal RPG, very lightweight game, super stylized, old school style game, very grim, fish hook in the eye kind of game system. Really interesting design. I'll tell you, people either love the style or they hate the style, right? I look at it and I see like every page of this book is like a piece of artwork. Other people look at it and say, you have made an incomprehensible role-playing game. You've made a game that makes it impossible for me to understand what you're talking about. I think it's very cool. Anyway, Mork Borg has actually led off into Pirate Borg, which is now a very popular old school style game. Pirate Borg is very well supported, probably a little easier to read in the book, but still a very stylized game. Well, you can get them both. In fact, you can also get Cyborg, which is a cyberpunk version of Mork Borg. I have all of them. I have Mork Borg right there. I have Cyborg right there and Pirate Borg, all sitting right on my shelf right over there. They're all very cool. And you can get all of the accessories for these, including the Heretic, Heretic Ferocity and Cult Heretic, these 2 different little zines that are included. So the collection itself, I think, is $20. So $25 is the threshold price. And the threshold price gives you Mork Borg and Pirate Borg and Cyborg and all of their like accessories for this. So $10 gives you Mork Borg plus the 2 separate books. $20 gets you, or $25 also includes Cyborg, Pirate Borg, and Mork Borg icon. So very cool stuff. I really like them. They're very stylized. You can learn a lot about it. If you want to take a look at it before you drop your $26, $27 on this, you can find a lot of it for free. Like you can find a lot of ideas about it for free and samples of it and things like that on DriveThruRPG and other places. And because it is so heavily stylized, I would, if you're not familiar with it, I would go get yourself familiar with it before I drop $27 on it, before you look at it and go, oh man, this style is completely incomprehensible and I don't like it. But if you kind of really dig, black metal, artsy fartsy, RPG, classic styles, super grim, Mork Borg is very cool. And then if you like old school cyberpunk and Pirate Borg, which is very popular, the Borg collection is a pretty good deal. So take a look at the Mork Borg collection up on Bundle of Holding. And of course, take a look at the products themselves and learn more about them before you drop your money, because it's such an opinionated RPG that you might bounce off of it. Potbellied Kobold, my friend Jeff Stevens, has a whole bunch of different stuff. Now, here's the deal. As of this recording, there is only 1 day and 16 hours left. But by the time you see this video on YouTube, you have only mere hours to get in on this deal. I did this late. I should have done it last week, and I didn't do it last week, so I'm doing it this week. But there's still time. But by the time you are listening to this, by the time you're watching this, there's very little time left to get on this. And that's the Potbellied Collection, which is a whole series of books by Jeff Stevens. Some of these I have written for 5e-based supplements, including Adventures and including Weapons of Legend and other things. Total value is a lot, $80 worth of stuff that you get for $20. So really good rate. Four major products that you get for $20, $5 a product. Really good stuff. Good deal. So that's Jeff Stevens' Potbellied Kobold 5e bundle of holding. Link of that in the show notes. But probably the best deal you're going to see today is the DCC Dungeon Crawl Classics Megabundle on Humble Bundle. This one's really hard to pass up. 82 different Dungeon Crawl Classic adventures for $18. That is crazy. What is that? 18 divided by 82. 20 cents a product. 20 cents per product is bananas. One thing they did, my biggest problem with these massive bundles of Humble Bundles that they have here is that, like, how do you download all this stuff? Well, they have now like bulk download buttons, and bulk download, and literally like 80 products come pouring down on your machine. It is really, really good. So a lot of times when you see these bundles of holding, Humble Bundles, and they have like 80 products, you're like, yeah, but only like 10 of those are good, right? And the other 70 of them are kind of filler. Not so in this case. Some of the products that you get include, like, the whole Dungeon Crawl Classics core book is one of the major features of this. So if you have none of Dungeon Crawl Classics, you have that. You get it in here. There's a ton, piles and piles and piles of adventure. They're old magazines called Level Up Magazine, copies of those. Ton of different things that you get in here. For $18 for such wide amount of stuff, it's really, really a tremendous deal. So you get the entire Dungeon Crawl Classics rulebook, which is this like 600-page rulebook that covers all of Dungeon Crawl Classics, plus piles and piles of adventures. Some of their most popular adventures are included in here. Tons of stuff. And just for inspiration, like, this is one where it's like, just to kind of peruse through, even if you don't really plan on running it, even if, like, I don't know, like $18 for this amount of stuff that you can kind of read through and get ideas from and just get inspired from the cover art, for crying out loud. Really, really good deal. So I really like it. They have other versions of this bundle as well, a 22-item bundle that comes with a little less, but does include the rule book for $10. So if you're like, I really don't want all that stuff, but I do want more DCC stuff, you can get, save yourself $8. There's an 84 bundle that comes with 2 physical books, which is 2 adventures that come to you for free. But that one you're paying more. You're paying $40 for that because you're actually getting a physical version. So I would recommend at least the 22-item bundle or the 82-item bundle for tons of stuff. People really like DCC. I've only played it a couple of times, but I really like the idea of it, and I know that it is a well-loved system, and this is a tremendous value. $932 of value for $10, $18. Really, really good deal. So that is the Goodman Games Mega Bundle for DCC and 5e, available on Humble Bundle. You can find a link to that in the show notes. Fateforge. So Fateforge is one, I don't mention it very often, but Fateforge is another fully rewritten 5e system. Fateforge, I think it has 5 books, but you can actually get the books in PDF, pay what you want over on DriveThruRPG. And the one thing that Fateforge does that's kind of different than the other 5e variants that are out there, Fateforge has been around for a while, and one of the things that it does that other 5e variants don't do is it has sort of these thematic wrappers to it. If you want to play dark fantasy or high fantasy or high technology fantasy, there's like these different little prompts all throughout all the books that say this, if you're playing the dark fantasy version, this is what you'll use. If you're playing the high fantasy version, this is what you'll use. It's a very neat system. So they have a new crowdfunding campaign going on right now called Secrets of Magic, which is a lore and magic toolbox that can be used with any version of 5e, but also used specifically for Fateforge. And if you're interested, they do not have a free sample, which I think is a bummer. But you can go take a look at the kind of products that they have, because they have these pay what you want versions of it. So you can go see what Fateforge is like, which I recommend. I always think it's kind of neat to get like new magic books and stuff like this, because magic books can be as little as dropping in a single item that has a one-use magic spell on it, from one of these books. Or you can drop the entire book and have all of the new subclasses and all of the new spells and all the new items and stuff like that. You kind of get to decide how much of a book like this you want to drop into your 5e game. So I really like books like this. I definitely want to check it out, because I think spells are one of these neat ways. Spells in particular are a neat way of customizing your entire campaign, because it's just this one tiny little rule set, but that rule set, that one spell, could be completely unique among all of the other rule sets that exist there. So magic books in particular, I think, are very valuable. You can take magic spells and tie them to items that they can use once. You can take spells and train them as actual spells so spellcasters can use them. You can add them to weapons or armor so they can do them once. You can add them to monsters so monsters can do spells that the characters have never seen before. There's lots of cool ways to use spells in your game, and you get to really turn the dial on like how much or how little of it you want to use. Do you want to just use a spell once on one monster? You can. But if you want to expand out further than that, you can too. So looks really cool. This is from Studio 2 Publishing, a partner of Studio Agate. And this is the Secrets of Magic Lore and Magic Toolbox for Fateforge, available on Kickstarter. So this past week, we saw our first hints at the D&D starter set coming out in September. It started off with a video that Wizards of the Coast published that I think was only a couple minutes long. It was hosted by Justice Ramin Arman, who works at Wizards of the Coast. Justice was a longtime freelancer for Wizards of the Coast and developed many excellent products, fantastic designer. And he said that he is in charge of the D&D starter set, which is a hell of a cool thing and a hell of a responsibility because, in my opinion, the D&D starter set is the most important RPG product that can be made. The most important product. And the reason why it's the most important product is that is the gateway to the hobby. Most people, I think this is probably true, most people are going to find their way to the TTRPG hobby through a D&D starter set. Most new people are going to find it through a D&D starter set. Now, they are finding it other ways too. They're finding it through streaming video. They're finding it through popular culture like Stranger Things. They're finding it in lots of ways. But a lot of times, if like you want to get into D&D, probably the first product you're likely to buy is a starter set. So this new starter set is going to be very interesting. I wasn't really going to talk about it because the video didn't really have much to say, but then there were more articles and more videos and more things that came out. There was a thread over on EN World that talked about it, and more of it has been described and shown. Heavy focus on cards, like cards that you can use for NPCs, cards that you can use for items, cards that you can use for monsters, and even cards for building your character. So they have this sort of idea of like you pick the main part of your character, you add on a card that talks about your species, you add on another card that talks about your background, and then you're sort of done, right? And then you have your item cards. What's interesting is how board game-like they have made D&D. Some people might criticize that. I actually think it's a really good idea. I think that for some people, it's hard to understand what role-playing games are really like, but they understand board games. So if you make it a little bit more board game-like, there's an easier bridge into getting into like true role-playing. So I think that that's a really neat idea. The only outstanding question for this whole thing is how much is it going to cost? I'm hoping that the price is reasonable. There was kind of like waffling, like it's probably going to be more than $30, but how much is it going to be? And I really hope the price is reasonable. I don't know what the reasonable price is. I think like, I will say this, like when the original 2014 starter set came out, it was the manufacturing cost was so low on that in some cases it would be on Amazon for like $8. Whenever it hit like sub $10 rates, I used to just buy a bunch of them. And then I'd like throw them in gift exchanges and I'd throw them in like lending libraries and I'd just put them everywhere, right? Because those starter sets were so great. This one definitely looks like it has more stuff going on in it than the Phandelver starter set did by a lot. It's got multiple maps. It's got all of these cards, but they clearly have designed it around making it inexpensive to produce because it's all cardboard, right? It's all paper. There's, as far as I know, other than dice, although it said it has multiple sets of dice in there, so that could be kind of expensive. But other than dice, everything else in it is paper. Paper tokens, paper stand-up minis, paper cards, paper rule books, and everything else. Some other interesting things they said about it is that it's meant to be replayed, that you can play it multiple times and have different things. So I think that's a really cool idea. I saw little hints that showed that there's actual character advancement in it. So it's not like you just do level 1 board gamey kind of thing, but you actually advance your character. They haven't described anything about that. And there's all kinds of disclaimers like, oh, it's still very new. We don't know what we're doing. Nothing is guaranteed. But lots of cool stuff they have. If you want to see more like screenshots and conversation of it, I recommend seeing the EN World threads. There's a couple of different EN World threads where they've been talking about it. That is where I think the conversation has been very interesting. Oh, one feature that I thought was fascinating is that there's no ability scores. right? There's only ability bonuses. It's very funny because I argued that we didn't need ability scores for monsters. And I had a bunch of people that are like, I like ability scores. It tells me when a monster is high or low or something. And I'm like, so does the ability bonus. It kind of tells you the same thing. And then here they go. They got rid of the ability bonus. So I think that, at least for the starter set. So I think that's kind of interesting. And it makes you wonder, like, should they have gotten rid of the ability scores? I don't know. It's really hard to get rid of ability scores because it's such a feature of D&D for the last 50 years. But I think it's interesting that the starter set, they're like, well, the starter set people generally aren't going to know about the 50-year history. So we're going to focus on just ability bonuses, which makes sense. So glad to see it's physical. Glad to see that it's got lots of cool stuff. Glad to see Justice Armand as the designer. So I'm positive about it. I think it's going to be very cool. I think the only question is that price point. I think that it almost certainly can't be more than $50. And I think $50 would be a lot. $40, not so bad. 30 would be pretty good. Anything less than 30 would be awesome. So we'll see. We're going to have to see what that's like. But I'm not in charge of WOTC's marketing. They don't pay me to be a consultant for them on business-related issues. So, hey, whatever. But it looks pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about it. So to me, one last statement about like the importance of this product. And I've run this idea by a bunch of friends of mine, a bunch of people in the industry, and some people are like kind of hand wave it, and other people are like, no, that's probably pretty true, including some people that used to work at Wizards of the Coast. And my argument is that when you talk about the products that Wizards of the Coast puts out there that really change the hobby, that really have a direct effect on the hobby one way or the other, there are 3 products in my mind that do this. One, the core books. If the core books were really bad and didn't work out well, it's going to hurt a lot of people getting into the hobby and staying in the hobby and staying in other things. 2 is a starter set. A bad starter set means that people are going to repel off of the game. And 3 is an open license and an open license reference document so that publishers can build off of that stuff. So the 3 most important products that have come out from Wizards of the Coast, and probably the most important products that will come out from Wizards of the Coast over the next like 5 years or so, to me is the core books, which are already out, the starter set coming in September, and the 5.2 SRD, which hopefully we will see soon. After that, whatever they put out, it's not going to have a huge impact on the hobby one way or the other. Hopefully it's good stuff. Hopefully it's the same, good quality stuff that we enjoy. But even if it's really good quality stuff, it's not going to change the entire hobby because it's that good. And if they put out some duds, it's not going to hurt the hobby either. In my opinion, they put out several duds over the past few years, and I wouldn't say that the hobby has gotten worse. So I would argue Vecna Eve of Ruin is not a fantastic campaign adventure. I don't think the hobby got hurt because of Vecna Eve of Ruin. I don't think it mattered that much, right? I think that, when you look at products that they put out, only if the core books had been bad, and I don't think they are, if the starter set is bad, and it doesn't look like it will be, the jury's still out, right? And if they did not put out a new license agreement, those things would change the hobby one way or the other. But once those things are out there, I think the rest of it is just gravy. The rest of it is like, hopefully it's good and we use it. If it's not, well, then we don't worry about it. So those are my thoughts on that. There was a very fun video published. I don't know this channel at all, but it seems to be quite a popular channel.
You might say I'm a bit of
Sci something was Sci Show, which has 8 million subscribers. The video got 300,000 views and it was put out yesterday. Short video, 6-minute video talking about why is it so hard to schedule your D&D games. And he brings up some very interesting points about it, that there are essentially 3 variables that occur that make it hard to schedule a D&D game. 1, the number of people that are coming. 2, the number of slots available where anybody could play. And then 3, what slots each individual cannot make. And as those slots decrease, as the number of open slots that people, if you have fewer open slots and people have more slots that they cannot meet, the likelihood of you being able to get your game together goes down significantly. So more players that have fewer times available reduce your likelihood of getting games significantly. He's got some actual math in here, the percentages of this kind of stuff. It's a really interesting video. One thing I like about this video is it helps support what I recommend for having a stable RPG group. So I wanted to use the opportunity for this video, which is quite popular, to reiterate what I think is a good pattern, a good design pattern for having a stable RPG group. And that design pattern falls into a handful of categories. Number 1, try to pick a single time every week that you can play. Try to make it the same time every week that you can play. The advantage of that is people can kind of work the rest of their schedule around to kind of bookmarking and blocking that part of their schedule. If you're always trying to schedule it week to week, then people's other parts of people's lives are going to fall in there and they're not going to have time. That's still going to happen, but it happens a little less often if you say, we are going to play at Wednesdays at 7 p.m. or we're going to play Sunday at noon. That's step one. Step two is having a more reasonable time frame for the game. I run 3-hour games. 3-hour games to me are that to me is the perfect length of time. It's just enough time that you can kind of break it up into 2 hour-and-a-half-ish segments. You can take a break in the middle. People aren't going to be too bored. You're not going on too long. And it's easier to fit 3 hours into your day than it is to try to fit 4 hours into a day. Surprisingly, how hard fitting another 4-hour block into your game is going to be. 3 hours, you get a little bit more likelihood that people can fit it into their day. So I really like 3-hour games. And then we come to my design pattern for players. And I recommend what I call a 6+2 pattern. And what that means is you have 6 regular players, 6 people who have committed to being able to make the game regularly. And then you have 2 people who are on call. And the on-call players are people who may, for whatever reason, not be able to commit, but want to still be involved. And they're like, I can make some of them, but not all of them. But they are people who can drop in to the game when there is a seat free. The advantage of this is, and then the other big part of this is you are willing to play the game with as few as 4 people. The nice thing about that pattern is it takes 5 people canceling before you don't have a game. If you are a GM who requires that all of your players be there to run a game, you're going to be in the world of hurt that he's talking about in this video. If instead you say, we play even if we don't have everybody there, the flexibility increases about by as much as it decreases when you need everybody. So it makes it much easier to have a game regularly. So if you are able to have 6 players that commit to a single session once a week for 3 hours, and 2 people who are willing to jump in when there's a space available, because some of the 6 people might not make it, it takes 5 people canceling before you can't run a session. If you're willing to play with 3 people, it takes 6 people canceling before you have another session. Now, your games may be very different if it's like 3 people one week and 6 people the next week and the 6 people changes. You're going to have to kind of account for that in how you run your game and the style you run your game. A big question that comes up is, what do we do with the characters that were there in one week and aren't there the next? And the answer is just pretend they're not there. Just don't worry about it. Like, you don't have to come up with a crazy story. You don't have to come up with a bunch of reasons. Just let them fade into the background. When I polled GMs on this topic, that's what most GMs do. Most GMs just say they let the character fade into the background. You don't have to come up with a story. Everybody knows why it happened. This is just a game we're playing. We're not writing an epic novel. It's okay to have some people not there. So that pattern works really well for me. And this video that talks about the math behind it helps support that pattern, that idea that if you're willing to have people not there, and if you have some people that you can call in when there's open seats available, it means that you can have a very consistent D&D group. I've had 2 groups, a Wednesday group and a Sunday group. And even then, I don't have 2 on-call people. I really only have 1 on-call person, but I have 1 on-call person for each group. And it means we almost always run a game. I have 3 people who canceled today for the game that I'm running in an hour and a half, a little less than an hour and a half. We have 3 people that canceled that game, and still we're going. And it's because the on-call person can jump in, and we have 3 others, and that's enough for us to run a game. So we're running a game even though 3 people canceled. That's how we keep a stable game. I thought that was really, really useful. Bob Worldbuilder did a really fun video where he talked about Kickstarters, and specifically, look, he even look at him. He wore a jacket, wore a jacket to show, I guess, and look, he's got bar charts and stuff up in his monitor to show how serious he is about this topic. But he was talking about the trends of Kickstarters in tabletop role-playing games, and particularly the trends in Kickstarters when you compare 5e TTRPGs and 5e Kickstarters to non-5e Kickstarters. And he has lots of interesting data, lots of stuff that he showed with the trends. Let's see, I want to find where's the coolest, the coolest kind of trend. That was an earnings trend. So so you can see these big surges and these periods of time where 5e earnings and earnings coming from other Kickstarters started to shift. And you can see where the big jump was. It was right around COVID. COVID changed a lot when it came to trends in this. One thing to consider with a lot of this, though, is sometimes these huge spikes in the amount of money that various things made were like one or two Kickstarters that just made a mint. The Cosmere Kickstarter, for one, and the Avatar: The Last Airbender Kickstarter had very different, major changes in what happened with tabletop role-playing games. So that's something to consider. But his general outcome, his general summary of events is essentially the tabletop role-playing game industry and hobby, as it connects to crowdfunding campaigns, is still very, very strong. It's still stayed very strong. And his expectation is that we will see more 5e Kickstarters coming out because D&D 2024 is out, and yet we don't have a 5.2 system reference document yet to write games. So, but also the kind of big shift that also we are starting to see many more non-5e RPGs and that are coming out and being crowdfunded on Kickstarter, and that there seems to be plenty of interest in those too. This is kind of interesting. Mike Merle's former lead, he was the lead designer of the D&D 2014 version and worked at Wizards of the Coast for many years, worked on 4th edition. I think, did he work on 3rd? I don't know if he worked on 3rd, but he worked on 4th and he worked on 5th, and now works at Chaosium. And he made a statement that D&D isn't cool anymore. I listened to the EN World podcast. They talked about this. I can't remember exactly what interview he was on. I know he was on Questing Beast talking about it, but I think I've heard him on other places too, where he's basically saying that he wonders whether or not, with all of the missteps that Wizards of the Coast has done, OGL and other things, that just generally speaking, the fans that are aware of the industry, maybe not everybody, obviously people, there's lots of people that don't really pay attention at all to what's going on in the TTRPG industry, but anybody that's really involved, particularly game masters, really feel like Wizards of the Coast and D&D isn't cool anymore, and now there's other cool RPGs. And Bob's data kind of shows that that sort of stuff is going on. I'm kind of agnostic, right? Because I feel like RPGs can be cool and D&D is cool too, and we all get to kind of decide. Also, we're still seeing a lot of different stuff that's getting put out there for 5e. So I think that there's, whether or not it's still cool or not is kind of a big question. Scipio, friend of the show, Scipio says he disagrees about me not cool because he hasn't seen any other RPG that's filling Madison Square Garden up or getting a write-up in Rolling Stone. And that's true. I will give you that, but it depends on cool with who. And you could argue that the minute Rolling Stone magazine writes about it, that means it's already not cool anymore because it's not on the cutting edge. I don't really know. And I don't know if it really matters, right? It doesn't really matter, I think, one way or the other. The question is how well is it going to do? Again, how good that starter set is going to be. Is it going to be accessible so that people can get into the hobby? And when they come in the hobby, they stay in the hobby. But also one thing that's very clear to me is we have a lot of really awesome RPGs, and I would include 5e in that. I would include D&D 2024 in that. There's lots of awesome RPGs, many of them that have different styles of play that we can sort of decide to pick with our friends when we actually sit around the table. The question is the hobby going to continue to bring new people in? I'm not sure the systems themselves or even the companies or the relationships of companies are really going to have a big effect on that. I think the bigger effect is is Stranger Things going to talk about D&D again, right? Are we going to see more streaming stuff? Are we going to see, is Madison Square Garden going to get filled up even more? Are there other areas of pop culture that's going to kind of point people towards D&D or other RPGs, and then as they get into those other RPGs, they get into the hobby and they learn about everything else and they see everything else. So I don't really know, but it's kind of interesting. And anyway, it looks like it's good. It looks like the hobby's doing well. If we look at these numbers from Kickstarter, we look at what's been going on, there's definitely lots of interest in the TTRPG hobby, which is great. Which kind of leads me to my next thought. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for a little while, which is what RPGs am I looking forward to in 2024? I'm already 3 months into 2024, right? We're already good ways in. But I have some RPGs that I'm personally interested in playing and running that I wanted to talk about. And these are the ones that kind of caught my eye when I thought about these awesome new RPGs that are out or on their way. What are the ones that I'm really excited to play myself? These aren't like the end all be all of all RPGs. These are the ones that I myself am like interested in learning more about, reading, running, playing, all that kind of stuff. One is Dolmenwood. Dolmenwood is a old school style RPG. The PDFs have been out for a while. We've got folks in our Sly Flourish Discord server that are running Dolmenwood and really, really like it. I love the PDFs. I can't wait to get the physical version in my hand because I'm pretty sure those books are going to look really, really good. I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to hold those in my hand. People that have played Dolmenwood love the setting, love the style of game, and really feel that it's interesting. So Dolmenwood looks really, really good. I am a huge fan of 13th Age. This past week, I was kind of thinking about like, what are my actual absolute favorite RPGs? And 13th Age was high on the list. I really enjoyed 13th Age. I haven't played it in a while. I don't think I've played it in many years. Can't even think about the last time I played it. It's been a long time since I played 13th Age, but wow, we had fun with it. And 13th Age is really like in an interesting spot because it's very different from like the two other RPGs that are surrounding it on my list here. Dolmenwood and Cairn are nothing like 13th Age. It's nothing like those. 13th Age is a super heroic fantasy RPG built on the bones of 3rd edition and 4th edition D&D with a high power curve for characters, lots of character agency, lots of story focused stuff. Really, really fun. My big thing is like if you loved 4th edition of D&D, if you love the kind of character power and the story focus, the kind of the way that the epic stories took place in 4th edition D&D, 13th Age is, in my opinion, the spiritual successor to 4th edition that I think is really, really fantastic. So I really love 13th Age. Then there's a new version coming out, hopefully this year. I am very excited to see that new version of 13th Age and would love to run it again with my group. Cairn 2. Cairn by Yohai Gal is a old school style, the original one was a very thin book for a very lightweight, classless, levelless, old school style role-playing game. And Cairn 2 recently came out. And it just looks great. I've been flipping a lot. This is one that I've been spending more time with recently. And you can actually get the Player's Guide and the Warden's Guide. Wardens is their version of GMs. You can get it for free. And in fact, not only is it free, this one of the things I really love about Cairn and Cairn 2 is that Yohai Gal has really given so much of it to the community in so many ways. One, all of the text of Cairn 2 is available under a Creative Commons share alike license. An attribution share alike license, which means you can develop directly against Cairn. You can use material that's published in Cairn as long as you are likewise sharing your material under the same kind of Creative Commons license. I think that's outstanding. And the tools are also available under those same things. So Yohai is also clearly a developer and built a application for character building called Kettlebright. And Kettlebright is available, you can download the Docker for it and you can fire it up on your own server under the same kind of agreements that the other ones have. So Kettlebright is this app, and you can find the entire source code for Kettlebright on GitHub, and has a Docker file so that you can fire up your own version of this. I would love to see more RPGs that do this kind of thing. I would really love to see Shadowdark do this with Shadow Darklings. I really love Shadowdark. I've talked about how much I love Shadowdark. But Shadow Darklings is a web-based application for building characters. It would be really cool if we knew that we could have a downloadable version of that character thing so that we don't have to count on Shadow Darklings being available forever. I would really love to see Shadow Darklings being released under some kind of ability for me to be able to fire up my own local version of it. But also the second edition, if you go, actually, there's a little trick, and I will link to this down in the show notes. If you go to that official app and you go to the source code on GitHub and you go to your GitHub page and you go to Cairn, you get the whole website for Cairn, which includes all of the text for the second edition of Cairn in Markdown. Right? So you can actually grab this whole thing. I will post a link in the show notes so you can grab it from GitHub. But essentially you can take all of Cairn 2, which isn't even out in a physical book yet, and you can download it all in Markdown and stick it on your Obsidian notebook. I stuck it in my Obsidian notebook, so I now have an Obsidian version of Cairn. There's not a lot of full RPGs that you can get and stick right in your Obsidian notebook or throw in whatever your Markdown thing is. So it looks really cool. Anyway, Cairn looks really neat. The books look beautiful. It's coming in a new box set. I think I should be getting it pretty soon. The box set for Cairn, which looks like it's going to be gorgeous, includes 3 player guides, the Warden Guide, and a bunch of adventures in it. It looks really, really cool. So I'm looking forward to that. Shadow the Weird Wizard is now out and available. I have the physical copies. I really want to play it. This is probably Shadow the Weird Wizard by Rob Schwab is the sort of lighter successor to Shadow the Demon Lord. My players loved Shadow the Demon Lord when we ran it. We ran I think about an 11 or 12 session Shadow the Demon Lord game. I loved running it, but it was super dark. And my players were like, yeah, we loved it, but it was super dark. And we wanted to try a little bit more of a high fantasy version of Shadow the Demon Lord, which is Shadow the Weird Wizard. It likewise looks really, really cool. 2 big books, a game master guide and a player guide. Lots of options. It has probably the widest number of character builds that I have seen in any single volume of a game. If you probably excluding the multi-classing options from like D&D 2024. If you include multi-classing in D&D 2024, that one book has I don't know, countless builds. Shadow the Weird Wizard is very similar in that as your character levels up, you can pick from different selections of expert paths and master paths. And you can pick from any of the expert and any of the master paths, which means the number of potential character builds that you have is really, really high. But Shadow the Weird Wizard looks lots of fun. The way that the style of game is intended is that you go from like level 1 to level 10. It's intended to be played over 10 sessions. I would probably do it over 20 to give myself, because I run 3-hour sessions, to give myself a little bit extra time. So I'd like to see that. The next game I'd like to try is Mothership. I've heard so much about it. I own a copy. It's sitting right over there. I'm scared to run it because I'm always scared to run RPGs for the first time without really having played it first. I'm hoping to play Mothership at some conventions and see what that's like, because I'm excited to play Mothership as well. I hear so many good things about it, but I have not had a chance to play it myself. So those really are the 5 role-playing games that I am looking forward to playing the most. I still, notice like 5th edition isn't on here at all. Well, I'm already running 3 different 5th edition games, including a game that's mostly D&D 2024 at this point, but also was Level Up Advanced 5e. I'm running a 2014 D&D game, and I'm running Tales of the Valiant. So I'm running all the 5es already. So that's the only reason, and I plan to continue to run those, but I'm excited to try some of these other games too. And I just think it's such a great time to see these incredibly high production value games from people who really love writing these games, whose heart is really into it. It's so exciting to kind of see that stuff and to play these games. So when we think about like, is D&D cool or not, it kind of doesn't matter, but we have so many RPGs that we can enjoy. And it really, like, instead of thinking of it as a negative of like, oh, D&D's boring now, or I don't like it anymore. And so there's some people that don't, and that's cool. And then there's some people that totally love it. I love it. I think it's really cool. I've been running with D&D 2024 stuff. I've been running D&D 2014 for 10 years now. I've been running Tales of the Valiant in an hour. I'm running Tales of the Valiant. I love all these games. They're so much fun. And we get to decide. We pick with our group, and we get to modify it however we want. Oh, I want to throw the luck system in my A5e game. Or I want to take the idea of supply from A5e and bring it into my Tales of the Valiant game. Or I want to take Doom points from Tales of the Valiant, drop in my 2024 D&D game. We can mix and match this stuff all we want. And then there's all of these different RPGs that we can enjoy as well. And the thing that I really like about these RPGs is like they are so transparent between the creator of the game, who has an idea for the game that they want, and us. And the production value is so high on that a lot of times to get that transparent connection between the creator of a game and us usually means they don't have the kind of money or backing that like a big company would have. But in these cases, I think in all of these, Dolmenwood, 13th Age, Cairn 2, Shadow the Weird Wizard, and Mothership, in all these cases, they have high production value and also are very transparent between the creator of the game and us. And I think that's really powerful. I love that style for this game. So I'm really looking forward to playing and running all of these games. An interesting thing happened in my Wednesday game. And there was a bit of it's kind of interesting because I talked about it before. I'm working on a project for Sly Flourish patrons about like bringing together lots of house rules for 5e. Lots of things that I've been using, lots of things that I've heard about, lots of ideas. And one of the ones that I had put on here on that list was the retreat action. The retreat action is something that I'm stealing from the game 13th Age. And the way the retreat action works is that pretty much at any time in a battle, any player can say, I think we should retreat, or we're going to take the retreat action, right? And at that moment, you basically break out of combat and switch away from the mechanics of combat and switch into a story. And in the story, it's how do you retreat? Where do you go? And what was the cost, right? What happened when you retreated? And we talked about it a lot there. Some people were bringing up the idea of like, well, a problem of the retreat action is that players might start to use it tactically, but they're not really, because it's still a loss is a loss. No one wants to retreat. And retreating with mechanics is really hard. If you've got people that are down, if you've got people that are like deeply engaged with monsters that are connected, they're not going to take 5 opportunity attacks to try to run away. And then there's like, oh, well, it turns out the monster's 10 feet faster than you are, which means they're just going to catch up and attack you. That's right. You want to get away from all the mechanics of it. And instead you want to say, let's break out of combat and let's talk about what your retreat looks like. So I talked about that on like Monday and Tuesday. And then Wednesday, I had 4 players at my game, and I ran them against a battle that was a hard battle. It was, and I used the D&D 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide guidance. I was kind of curious, instead of using the Lazy Encounter benchmark, which I talked about last week, I wanted to use the actual D&D 2024 guidance. And holy cow, did it build an encounter that was way too hard. 26 CRs worth of monsters against 4 10th level characters. Now, granted, couple things happened. One is the 10th level characters had already fought a great big hard fight just before and didn't get a rest, which means many of them were already low on hit points. And thing number 2 is one of the players was charmed and thought it would be funny that he would beef up one of the monsters with like a single-use magic item. And it turned out he gave it to the exact wrong guy. And that guy then immediately killed that character because he did so much damage that he killed the character who was charmed and got that thing. It was a maestro, a performer maestro. So with that character down, then suddenly other characters started dropping too. Now, I'm pretty sure, even if that circumstance hadn't occurred, I think the characters might have had a really hard time. It was 2 fire giants and a performer maestro. The performer maestro is an NPC that's been kind of poking and making fun of the characters for the whole campaign for about a year now. The players hate him so much. Giles Freerunner is his name. He's a satyr bard, and he loves to like play fancy pipes and plays this giant electric lute and make fun of the characters and talk about how his boss, who is a Ifrit, they found out he's an Afridi, is going to kick their asses, right? The Afridi is a general and he's going to kick their asses. So he then approached them and he said, like, you guys are my best friends. And the player's like, really? We hate you. And he's like, yeah, I know. But I keep talking to the boss. I keep talking to Scraith is his name. I keep talking to Scraith, and Scraith says, like, look, if you sign this contract forged on a plate of brass from the city of Brass that says that you'll give over the key of worlds to him when you get it, he's willing to let you live. And the player's like, I have a better idea. How about we stab you in the face? And he's like, oh, that makes me really sad. And he summons these 2 fire giants, which were brass giants of the city of Brass. And they got this big fight, and holy cow, it went south pretty fast. And the 2 characters were down, 1 character was dead, and 1 character had 1 hit left. And that was my wife's character, Ozara. So Ozara says, I'm going to retreat. And we said, okay, let's talk about that. I said, how? What are you going to do? And she's like, I can summon a horse. And I go, great. You summon your steed. I'm like, what's the name of the steed? What does it look like on the horse? And she goes, and I want to grab one other person on my way out. So she grabs another person on the way out, and out they go. And then I'm a little flat-footed, but I narrate how the remaining character who's still alive is dragged unconscious by the giants back to this shrine called the Shrine of the Lower 12, which is this evil shrine. And there is Scraith, the Ifrit, although he is in his human form. And he's like, Giles, why'd you do this for? And then the other 2 characters show up and are peering out of a window. And one guy's dead. He's now turned into dust because he was hit with a fire sword, of his own fire sword, and he's turned into dust. And it was like, well, all his gear is here and stuff like that. And then they figured out, like, what are they going to do here? The fire giants who had been summoned suddenly disappeared and returned back to the city of Brass. So they didn't have to worry about them anymore. And then I talked to the player, and I was like, what if you played Giles Freerunner? And Giles actually betrays Scraith on behalf of the characters because he really does love the characters. And my player, who's kind of like into that stuff, is like, yeah, that's going to be awesome. So he played Giles. He then attacks Scraith after giving healing potions and stuff. Then the other characters burst in, and then they fight Scraith, and they beat him. And he ends up retreating to the city of Brass. And then they get other stuff back together again. All of that happened, and it was really fun story stuff. It was really interesting how it played out, and all of that happened because of this retreat action. That idea that you can basically stop in the middle of a battle when it's going south fast, and the players can say, we are outnumbered, this is going badly, let's retreat. And it's a way to kind of get away from pure TPKs, which this was going to turn into a TPK. And if it had turned into a TPK, I probably would have lended the same way, that their unconscious bodies would have been dragged to Scraith. Some of them would be healed up, and then they would be kind of forced to do another thing. But instead of going through all of that, You can instead say, you can get away. But it's at a cost, right? Like it's a negotiation. Now, you don't have to like put a big mechanical side on like what the cost is. Your whole point is breaking away from system and getting into story. So what is the story that's going to take place? What is that negotiation? I'm not going to tell Michelle, who's playing Ozara, that she has to use her action to summon her mount in order to get away. And because she used her action, she can only get so far. Boring, right? Not what we're doing. Instead, she's able to summon her mount. She's able to grab her mount. And then it's like, okay, what do you do then? Can I grab Zillion and get Zillion out there with me? Yes, you can. Okay, well then what happens to the other two? Well, this is what happens to the other two. They're taken away. We get away from the story and shift it. And now they're in a different spot where they have to now rescue the other two members of their party, or one of the members of the party. There are other things you can do. And so I really think that the retreat action, which is this 13th age rule, it's in 13th age SRD. I mean, they call it the flee action. I'm calling it retreat because making a flee is just negative. Like now people really don't want to take it. I think it can really work. Now, if your problem is that you think your players are going to exploit this, I bet you they won't. And also, because you get to describe what the penalty is, you get to decide how bad things get if they actually retreat. And if you really feel like your players are gaming the retreat action when they shouldn't, you can tell them you're not able to retreat. You can just say you can't. And that works fine, right? And you can explain all this. You should explain the retreat action to your players. Hey, this is how it works. You know, if you feel like a battle is going south and you need to escape, you can take the retreat action. You don't have to worry about opportunity attacks. You don't have to worry about gathering up your party members. We will switch to a discussion and we will talk about how you manage to escape. And then you can also tell them, and it's not really meant to be used as a tactic. If I feel like it's being used as a tactic, the answer is going to be you're not able to escape. If you really worry about that. I don't worry about that. I think it's such a negative thing that people aren't going to want to do it anyway. So that's the retreat action. And what was so funny is having this conversation with people on my Discord server and then needing it that very week. Like we needed it on Wednesday. And Michelle used it on Wednesday and it turned things around and it led to an interesting element to the story. One of the characters is still dead, but I think they're going to get resurrected by a fallen celestial that they've been working with. How about if I bring Andrew Armageddon? His character's name is Andrew Armageddon, which is a great name. Wizard. How about if Andrew Armageddon comes back? I said, great. How about if Andrew Armageddon is rezzed by Vriz, who's the celestial, and now you're kind of bound more to Vriz, and now your eyes glow white because you were resurrected by it. And he goes, yes, and he doesn't have any eyebrows anymore. And I was like, that's hysterical. So it's like the cost for being resurrected by a fallen celestial, you lost your eyebrows. So those are the kind of fun things that happen when you're using the retreat action. And I think the retreat action is a really good technique. It's a really good house rule. It's something else that you can drop into your game that I think can really move the story of the game in interesting directions when things are looking like it's going to be a TPK. Let's cover some patron questions. Every quarter now, we put up a new thread on the Sly Flourish Patreon. People can ask questions throughout the month, throughout the quarter, once a month. And every Friday, I answer every question that's there. And some of those questions I bring here to the show so that we can talk about them. Nathan F. says, do you have any house rules or suggestions when dealing with heavily obscured areas in combat? I've seen some strict interpretations of the D&D rules indicate that creatures who both can't see and are unseen attackers would get a straight attack roll. They have both advantage and disadvantage. But this seems a little strange since it makes stuff like the fog cloud spell pretty worthless. In general, do you tend to just wing it? And when it comes to advantage and disadvantage, or do you rely more on explicit abilities or rules to provide them? Yes. So this is something I still have an argument with one of my players who I've been playing with for 10 years about this. And he is like, I get that you're the GM, so we're going to go play real, but I still don't think it. But I think you are correct. And everything I have heard says that you are correct. That the way that obscurement works with something like fog cloud is it doesn't matter if you're in the fog cloud or outside of the fog cloud. It doesn't matter if one character is right on the edge inside the fog cloud and one side is right on the outside. Neither can see the other. And when you have two people where neither can see the other, both advantage and disadvantage are washed out. That doesn't make fog cloud worthless though, because there are other factors of fog cloud that have a big effect on the game. One of them is any ability that requires that you see your target, you cannot use. An example is you can't cast Fireball into a fog cloud because you can't see the target that you're trying. You can't see the space that you're trying to fire your Fireball in. You have to be able to see where you're going to drop it. You can't do opportunity attacks. So fog cloud is a great way to violate opportunity attacks. So that way you can move wherever you want because you need to be able to see your target to do an opportunity attack. Many different abilities are limited by things that you can see. Many spells, almost every single target spell, other than attack roll spells that do a DC, almost all of them require that you see your target. I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you something that's going to make your GM really mad. Fog cloud is fantastic on beholders. Beholders and darkness as well. Anything that obscures sight on a beholder or on a group that's facing a beholder makes the beholder almost worthless. GMs, I'm going to tell you something that can make your players really mad. When you're playing a beholder, ensure that the beholder has guardians who have blind sight. If you have blind sight guardians, they can go inside of those obscure areas and beat the crap out of characters that are hiding in those stupid fog clouds and darkness while they're not getting hit by a beholder. There are other ways too, gusts of wind and other ways. But if you're a GM and you're running a beholder, be prepared for how that beholder is going to handle situations where it's dealing with darkness or fog cloud. And players, if your GM is not paying attention to this, fog cloud and darkness, great way to survive a beholder fight, but don't be a jerk, right? Don't be a jerk about it. Beholders are meant to be kind of hard to fight. So yeah, think about that. But yes, that's the way it's intended. I run it that way. And I think that the idea that darkness or fog cloud is worthless when it's not granting anybody advantage or disadvantage, there are lots of ways that it does. Blind sight is one of them. There's now new ways to get blind sight in D&D 2024 for characters, but things like witch sight, the warlock's able to see and get advantage on attacks, the whole idea of like stopping characters from being targeted from abilities that require seeing your target, that's a big one. So there's lots of reasons why Fog Cloud is still a very good spell, even when you play it rules as written, which is that it doesn't matter if you're inside or outside of Fog Cloud, everybody has advantage and disadvantage, therefore it all washes out. Also, it washes out all advantage and disadvantage. So, rogues can't sneak attack inside of a Fog Cloud. Like, that's just the way it works. So that definitely has big effects on the game. Michael S. says, when running a written adventure and using the lazy steps, how do you plan out a larger dungeon? In my case specifically, it's Xanathar's Lair. It has multiple routes and secret doors that could take the party in most directions. In terms of writing out potential scenes, there's possibly 7 or 8 scenes that could be in any order. I was thinking I would take big scenes and big secrets from my notes and refer to the book for the rest. I'm finding myself over-preparing because of its size and chance of it going in any direction. Yeah, so your instinct is correct. You do not need to fill out your scenes with every room of a dungeon. Instead, one of the advantages of the 8 steps when we're dealing with a dungeon and we're dealing with something like that is that you can decide how big a scene is. So I have dungeon crawls and I just will have one scene that says crawl the dungeon. But then I have a map, and then I have location descriptions maybe drawn directly on the map or listed in my Fantastic Location section. And I can decide what to fill those rooms with when the characters get there. One of the big advantages and one of the design ideas behind the 8 steps of Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master is that they are all little bowls of material to help you improvise scenes as you're running the game. Secrets and clues, you're not deciding what room a secret and clue is in. NPCs, you don't decide which room an NPC might show up in, which monsters they might fight. All of those things are separated out so that you can decide in the moment, I've got a location. Do I want to drop in an NPC? Do I want to put treasure in here? Are they going to fight a monster? What secrets they can learn? You get to decide which ones. So yeah, the intention when you have a large dungeon, and I've run this many times where I have like 20 rooms in a dungeon, I don't have 20 specific scenes. Somewhere I probably have a list of what those 20 rooms are. I probably don't fill them out with very much. I might just say armory, or I might say scrying pool, or I might say dimensional gateway, right? I don't really put much in there because I can improvise the rest, especially when I have NPCs that might be in there, or monsters that might be in there, treasure that might be in there, secrets they might discover. All of the other elements are intended to be improvised and used to help you improvise when you go to those locations. But also, since you're running a Xanathar's Lair directly from a book, yeah, you can rely on the book. You don't have to list stuff that's already listed in the book. One of the chapters of Return talks about the fact that you get to decide what steps are actually valuable for your prep for the next game you're going to run. Secrets are usually very valuable when you're running a published adventure, but a lot of time locations, monsters, NPCs might not be, because you're going to find those in the book anyway. But yes, you don't need to fill out everything. You can definitely only fill out the parts that you need. James says, my PCs forget what's on their character sheet. They forget they have abilities to handle situations such as short-term species, flying trait, or fire resist. I don't want to constantly remind them. Should I continue to remind them time after time, or just let it go to the waste bins of the game or other ideas? It's kind of up to you. If you know that they have things, I don't think there's any problem in reminding them. You could also, and it depends on how they're playing. If you have suggestions about ways, you could say one thing that we may want to do is give your sheet a quick review before you run the game so that you can remember all the things you have. Particularly even mid and high level 5e, it's a ton of stuff. I was playing a 7th through 10th level paladin in D&D 2024, and I had pages of stuff, right? It was a lot of stuff. And my trick was I reviewed it right before the game. I would go down the list and look at every feature that I had just to remember, oh, that's right, I've got that thing. And boy, there were features I totally forgot. I was a half-orc, and I forgot all about the half-orc feature. Not a half-orc, I was an orc. There's no half-orcs anymore. I was an orc, and I forgot about the orc. I forgot that I could do this like move and dash, I forget why. There was I think as a bonus action, I could add a dash to something, and I forgot. And I just, so if a GM, it's not up to the GM to remind players the stuff they have, but if you happen to remember it, you can certainly tell them. But I wouldn't hang on too tightly. It's not imperative that your players remember everything that they've got, nor is it imperative that you remind them of what they got. Instead, you all get to decide what kind of engagement you're going to have in the game and in the story. And if they forget stuff, they forget stuff. So my general advice is advice that I give very often, which is hang on loosely. Hang on loosely to the game. You don't need to have a perfectly tight game where everything is operating exactly as it should. It's fine to forget stuff. It's fine for you to forget stuff. It's fine to forget plot holes. It's fine to forget names of things. Give yourself a break. Give the players a break. You're all doing this to have a good time and relax and laugh. So I would not hang on too tightly to any of it. James G says, in the difficult conversations category, which is one of the big ones, difficult conversations is up there with scheduling as far as the hardest parts of running RPGs. I have a player who often has his character run ahead of the rest of the party. Last night, while the party was introducing themselves to a new PC using the Heroic Spark method, thank you, awesome, Heroic Spark is great, he took off while they were still socializing. One of the players is my girlfriend, and she told me later how that annoyed her. As a DM, my instinct is that the players can and should speak up when this happens. They're adults. They can say things like, hey, stay here so we can go together. Do you think I, as DM, should encourage the player to stay with the group next time this happens? Does it matter that the other players, 3 of the 4, are pretty new to D&D, and the runaway is a veteran player? As an aside, I'm a player in a game with a runaway PC, and I often express my displeasure, and it has no effect. Yeah. So this is a good time for a pause for a minute. So there's a couple ways to do it. One is if you have a player who's regularly doing this, it's a disruptive thing to the game. It's not an in-world thing. It's not a what my character would do. I mean, it is a what my character would do problem, but that's not just something where you can say, hey, it's changing the dynamic of the game. And I think it's worth having a one-on-one private conversation with the player to say, hey, one of the things I'd ask is that when other scenes are going on, that your characters stay in the other scenes for a lot of reasons. One is it's difficult for me as a GM to manage it. 2, it can be annoying to the other players who really don't want to have to worry about what's going on in some other place. But also part of it, a little bit, is a little bit of internalization and recognizing that one of the reasons they're probably running ahead is they're bored and they want to do stuff. And there might not be enough things for them to do in the scenes that they're involved in. This could definitely be a situation where they have a particular build of a character that's not really optimal for scenes of role playing, and they don't want to role play. They just want to go fight stuff. So that could be a cause. That's not a solution, right? That doesn't give you what you need to solve that problem. But part of it could be, hey, I'm going to step up the action a little bit to make sure you have more things that you can do in a scene. I ask that you also stay in the scenes while the other players are there. If I had to guess, and again, I'm only getting what you have in the post here, so I don't know everything. I know very little. That, it could be that they're bored. It could be that they're looking for the gameplay element that they are excited about, and they're not finding that gameplay element where they are. But I think it's worth having a conversation with them. If it's disruptive to the game, it's disruptive to the game. And I think it's worth having a conversation with them. And it's, I don't know if you feel comfortable doing this in the game where you're a player and talking to one of the other players who's doing the runaway PC and says, I know it's kind of fun for you to do that. It actually makes it harder on the rest of us, harder for the game to be smooth. Any chance you could have your character just stay with us while we're going through a scene? I mean, that's just, what's funny, and here's a funny bit, right? Although you say you often express your displeasure. A matter could be how you express your displeasure. I was going to say that in one side you're saying that, why do I as the DM have to be the one responsible for managing this stuff? Well, the answer is because that's the role we took, right? Like, we are responsible for the dynamic of the group. I had this conversation recently where it's like, it feels unfair sometimes that I have to be the one to kind of delicately manage situations with people. But this is being friends, right? This is about building and strengthening friendships. And, it's important to have those conversations and do our best. And sometimes even those don't work out, right? I've lost friends because conversations did not work out. And it makes me very, very sad. And that's the important part. The whole reason we're getting together is to spend good time with our friends, having a laugh, relaxing, and having a good time. Part of that, we have accepted some of that responsibility. It's not fair, right? It's not the way it should be, but how things should be is not how things are. And one of the realities is, as a GM, we're kind of leading the group. And when we're leading the group, it's kind of up to us to make sure that the group dynamic is good. Sometimes we'll have players that do a good job of managing it on their own, but sometimes not. And it really falls to us. So that idea of like, we are the one that has to kind of figure out how to talk to a player and figure it out. And sometimes we just don't get there. And we either live with it, like we know that certain players do things that can be disruptive, but we live with it anyway. Or we have to do the harder part of like, maybe the game's not for them. And that's can be really hard too. That's a last resort, right? There's lots of people that just say, get rid of them, right? And like, it's a lot easier to say, get rid of them when it's a group you don't know anything about than it is with a bunch of friends that are sitting around a table and saying, oh no, we're going to get rid of a person. Many reasons why that is the last thing you want to do. There are times where it's absolutely something you have to do. But, if there are ways to work towards a situation where you don't have to do that, that would work great too. So yeah, good question. And an important topic that we are going to talk about as long as we're in this hobby. Kaike O says, my group, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right, I apologize. My group usually plays at a friend's house and she has a small table. We are 6 players and 1 DM plus sheets, dice, grids, and cups. I want to remove my DM screen to save physical space, but since everyone sits so close to each other, I don't know how to do that while keeping my notes and maps hidden. How do you hide your notes and maps at your table? Do you have any tips? Fun fact, in Brazil, it's called Master's Shield instead of DM screen. Your Master's Shield. I don't use a GM screen. I don't like them. I don't like them for lots of reasons. I don't like having a barrier between me and the players. I think that both physically and symbolically, that's not something I'm a fan of. I think that I really want the physical impression at the table to be that we are all sitting around the table equally playing a game, even though one person is the GM. I think that, there are other ways to kind of obscure your notes, keeping them on your lap, setting them off to the side. One thing you may want to try here, I don't know if you've got the room for this, but you said they have a small table, is that I have a side table. I have a little tiny fold-out TV tray that I have next to my table that sits directly to my left, and I can put all my books and all my notes and all my other crap on there. And it leaves me lots of room in front to play. So you could do something like that. But a lot of tricks is like holding it in your hand and then closing the book when you're done. Like, I use physical monster manuals when I'm running it, and I have little tabs, and I'll flip the tabs, but the book is in my hand. I don't leave it flat out on the table. Sometimes I do, and it's okay. Right? That's not a big deal. So if you have a map, they're not going to like read everything. Like, it really, the question is like, what is a major surprise? Well, the fact that you're facing a monster and you can see what the monster is like, that's not a big deal. So you can really ask yourself, like, how much of your stuff do you need to keep hidden? What enjoyment are you removing if they saw it? Right? I think those are questions. But my trick, a couple tricks I have is like, the keep the books closed and only open them up when you're reading them, and use little adhesive tabs and things like that to keep track of it. Having a little side table that you can keep your stuff on, and most circumstances you can try to find it. You could even have like a little TV tray you bring with you. If it sounds like you're playing at someone else's house, you can even have a little side tray that you're bringing with you. I don't really do that at the game. I play a game at a friend's house and I just bring my stuff with me. But I think that all that kind of stuff can work. You can even have hey, do you have a little separate chair that you could use? And I do this, or I have a separate chair. That can work too. So hopefully those give you some ideas. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in tabletop role-playing games. I really hope you enjoyed the show today. If you did, the best thing that you can do is subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. Absolutely free to sign up. You get a free adventure generator for signing up. You get a weekly RPG-related article sent to your inbox, including links to all of the other work that I do. You can also become a patron of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to all kinds of awesome tips, tricks, tools, scenarios, special dedicated podcasts, and our Lazy DM community over on Discord. And they help me. You help directly support the work that I do. And you can pick up any of my books, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, Lazy DM's Workbook, Companion, City of Arches, Forge of Foes, and more on the Sly Sly Flourish Bookstore. The links for all of those are in the show notes. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Get out there and play an RPG.